My name's Grant Newsham, and I'll just give you a little bit about why I'm here and what my the connection to this is, besides being obviously part of CPAC. But in 2020, I was asked to go to South Korea and to examine allegations of electoral fraud in the 2020 National Assembly elections. And then I wasn't busy at the time, so I was glad to go and see what happened. And I must say, I wasn't expecting to find much, if anything, because everyone remembers that famous, if you're old enough, there's that famous picture of President Harry Truman holding up a newspaper saying, "Dewey wins." And my point is that elections often turn out in strange ways that you don't expect, and that's what I was expecting. But after I got there, and I started to interview witnesses, and that I realized very quickly that something very strange and bad had happened in South Korea. And the evidence, as I saw it, was overwhelming that the National Assembly elections, which gave the leftist opposition a very strong majority in the National Assembly, their Congress, that had happened. And I came away convinced, and have looked into the 2024 National Assembly elections, and basically the same thing happened. So I say that is what the evidence told me, and why I'm here. And you notice these days you hear about Ukraine, you hear about Gaza, Taiwan as problems, but what we don't hear is an impending disaster in South Korea that doesn't get attention, but it deserves a lot more. So what we're going to start off is move into this quickly, and we hope to have some time for questions as well. And we'll start off with Gordon Chang.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you, CPAC Korea, and Annie Chan. Thank you for your leadership. CPAC Korea is now protecting the world's most vulnerable democracy. Leftists are trying to seize control of the government after the impeachment of President Yoon Suk-yeol on December 14th, and now they have filed criminal charges against him for insurrection. The only thing that is protecting democracy in South Korea are conservatives in the cold, on the streets, confronting leftists on Seoul and Daegu and so many other cities. What's at stake? Well, nothing less than the continuation not only of democracy, but also of the South Korean state, the Republic of Korea. If you want to know where the front line of democracy and freedom today is, it is in the streets of Seoul. Now, that's the summary. Let's get started. And this crisis did not start in December with the impeachment of President Yoon. It did not start on April 15th, 2020 with the National Assembly elections, but today we will begin there. And on that day, in the election, it resulted in an uninspected, overwhelming victory for Minju, the Democratic Party of Korea. Minju won that election because of early votes in district after district tipped the results to the leftists. There were so many uniformly narrow victories that it was statistically improbable. As one observer said, either God did it or the election was rigged. I know God did not vote in that election, but the Chinese rigged it. The National Election Committee, what they did was they used servers from Huawei Technologies, the Chinese company, which Beijing was able to access. Also, there is reporting that the NEC cooperated with Tencent, the Chinese internet giant, to develop algorithms to switch votes that had been decided early. This election was stolen. In 2024, just like in 2020, we had unexpected results and big Minju victory. They did it again. This is something that never happened before in South Korean history. So we know that they took that election from the conservatives. NEC, National Election Committee, in 2024, they even hired Chinese to count the votes. So what's the consequence of all of this? Well, Minju now controls the National Assembly, as they have for the last 4 years, but something else, and that is Minju is not a normal political party. Its leaders somehow seem to think that they are still in the 7th century when China's Tang Dynasty controlled much of the Korean Peninsula. So you have leftist leaders. They believe they are vassals of this magnificent Chinese state, or even servants of it. And they are now allowing Beijing to infiltrate South Korean society and to determine outcomes in South Korean elections. So the Chinese and their North Korean friends are now conducting their warfares campaign. There are 3 warfares: psychological warfare, media warfare, and legal warfare. And because of that, the Chinese have become extremely influential. Here's an example. In early December, when you had the big pro-impeachment rallies in Seoul, there were a lot of faces that were not Korean. They were like my wife's. They were Chinese. When the Chinese presence became a political issue in South Korea, what happened? The Chinese demonstrators all at once disappeared. How could that have occurred? We are also seeing strange-looking policemen on the streets of Seoul who are violent with no name tags. Maybe they're Chinese. We don't know for sure, but we can see that this is a time of unusual, certainly extraordinary events in South Korea. In South Korea, Minju, we now have a leader, Lee Jae-myung. He is just like previous Minju president with Moon Jae-in. Moon Jae-in was a communist. He did not believe in the South Korean state. He believed in a unified Korea, probably under the control of Pyongyang. Now, the current Minju president, he is even more pro-communist, he is more ruthless, he is more pro-China, he is more pro-North Korea, and he is more anti-American than Moon Jae-in. And what does that mean? It means that the South Korean state is at an extraordinary time. Now everything is at risk. Freedom is at risk, democracy at risk, South Korea at risk. And that means South Koreans can now lose everything. As that banner says, it's time to save Korea. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gordon. You heard that quote Gordon just said about the 2020 election being either rigged or else God did it. Actually, the person who said that was the former president of South Korea's equivalent of MIT. What do you say? You'd better take that seriously, yet the government in South Korea did not. Let's get started. I want to sort of get a sense of the current situation in South Korea. And Professor Choi, I wonder if you could just speak for a minute or two to explain to the audience what's going on in South Korea as you see it.
Yeah, thank you very much. What's going on is very simple. We have crisis. President is being impeached, and the impeachment trial will be expedited because there is sort of left-wing coalition in judiciary. They are expediting the process. So probably someday in March, final verdict will be issued. So we don't have much time. That's what's going on.
Sir. And if President Yoon is forced to step down, then what happens?
I believe because the main reason why President announced the martial law is to investigate election fraud, and he sent more than 300 troops to search National Election Commission. That's pretty much obvious. So once president end up being impeached, then it's very difficult to talk about election fraud issue in Korea. Then, there will be regular election fraud, and the Chinese Communist Party will definitely be behind. So then, president, mayor, governor, all the public officials in Korea will be elected among pro-China group of people. Then Korea will quickly turn into pro-China country. Then I think China will have a really easy access through Korea to the Pacific Ocean. That's really what China is aiming at. Then probably that will be pretty much national threat to America. It's really issue of national security to the America. That's my view.
Yes, and one last question for you, sir. You and Attorney Park next to you have been very active in trying to expose electoral fraud of what has happened on multiple occasions. How has that been? Has it been easy for you? Have you been pressured? What are the difficulties? You had a hard time.
Yeah, mainstream media, legacy media in Korea, they're, I believe, controlled by foreign influence, definitely. So although we had a lot of thousands of time of street demonstration, actually there are 20 Seoul National University students joining us today. So they are wearing the black outfit, and they even go to the street, and we have really thousand times street demonstration. We in front of street and in front of the American embassy and Chinese embassy, Blue House. But all those activities were not properly reported through mainstream media. That's what's going in Korea. So I think the Chinese influence definitely there. Just extremely difficult to let ordinary people know what the election fraud issue in Korea.
Yes, even some people who have actually raised these charges have been threatened with arrest. You couldn't even say it in South Korea, and even now it's difficult, which sounds familiar, I think, to many of us here.
I'm shocked. I'm very shocked to search the Korean election fraud. I realized the intervention of China, especially. I think I saw the Huawei's Wi-Fi signals near election offices. I was very shocked. I never sent the Wi-Fi the name of Huawei. But there is Wi-Fi signals near election offices. And many election devices are made in China. And Chinese entities hold major stakes in Korean election-related companies. Shockingly, the password for Korean election system is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This means it's the same number of China's petition system online, government system numbers. An internal CSP control system number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the password of Korean election system's password is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Chinese year sounds wu. I think it's very dangerous to Koreans. And ballot counting centers during recounts steep and unsisted counterfeit ballots resembling freshly printed banknotes were discovered in large quantity. Over 40% of ballots came from early voting, which was likely manipulated through hackings, fake IDs, and double votings by Chinese nationals. Many of the thick digit ballots found in the counts are suspected Chinese counterfeit.
Thank you. That's a couple of things to elaborate on here. From around 2021 to 2023, the National Election Commission, which runs the elections, their computer system was hacked at least 6 times by the North Korean Lazarus group, at least 6 times. And that basically forced the authorities to allow a test by the National Intelligence the NIS, their intelligence service, to see if they could hack the NEC systems. They did almost every time, and without any difficulty, and it gave them basically free access to manipulate the systems, to change things, and to work on the counting machines as well. And this was, surprisingly, this happened, and the evidence was out there as well. Another thing, as Attorney Park said, there's Huawei components in the Election Commission's networks. When the head of the National Election Commission was told about this, his answer was, it is irrelevant. And keep in mind that everywhere else on Earth, free nations are trying to pull Huawei hardware out of their systems as fast as they can, but to the Korean electoral authorities, irrelevant. And that gives you a sense of how hard it has been for really freedom-loving Koreans to try and examine electoral fraud. And once again, you can think of how hard it has been in the United States to examine it as well. Now, Fred, I'd like you to give us the audience an idea of what is at stake with South Korea if it comes under control of one-party control of a leftist administration.
Thanks, Grant. South Korea plays a crucial role in promoting security in the Asia-Pacific and is a key strategic ally of the United States. That obviously gives strong motivations to China and North Korea to undermine North Korea, to create domestic instability, knowing that it will advance their interest and it will undermine American and global security. And this comes at a dangerous time because the threat from China and North Korea have really skyrocketed during the Biden administration because the Biden foreign policy was by far the most incompetent in American history. We've seen surges in threats to Taiwan, threats in the South China Sea, huge increases in the Chinese military spending, the Chinese missile arsenal, the Chinese nuclear arsenal. But I just want to talk about North Korea, which I don't think people are focused on. Biden decided to simply ignore North Korea. Now, you remember, Donald Trump had a very aggressive strategy. He engaged Kim Jong-un personally and significantly lowered tensions. Well, given Biden's incompetence and the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan in the summer of 2021, Kim Jong-un decided to surge his missile program. He fired at least 90 missiles in 2022, unveiled and tested a solid fuel ICBM that can not only hit the United States, but will be easy to hide and very hard to destroy because it can be launched very quickly. We've seen North Korea joining this new axis with Russia, China, and Iran. There's talk that we already know that Iran has participated in joint military exercises, naval exercises with Russia and China. There's talk North Korea will do that too. And now we have North Korea giving weapons to Russia to use in the war in Ukraine. This includes ammunition, missiles, and troops. North Korea has become a much more dangerous rogue state than it was when Trump left the Oval Office because of the incredible incompetence and neglect of Joe Biden. Now, I think Donald Trump is going to take steps to reverse that, but there's a lot of work to do. But part of this rogue behavior by China and by North Korea is undermining South Korea's democracy. And I think that when we peel the layers of this onion back, we're going to find active effort, and we already heard some very active efforts by China and North Korea to undermine North Korea's democracy because they are trying to undermine the security of the Asia Pacific, and if they can, drive the United States out of this region. So this election fraud issue is part of a much bigger security challenge.
Fred, I'd always heard that you hear it all the time, the U.S.-South Korea relationship is rock solid, forged in blood, can't be hurt. Is it possible that this alliance could come apart?
Right now, I don't think so. I think it is a rock-solid alliance, but there are leftists in South Korea who are pretty hostile to the United States, or they are too willing to appease North Korea. And that was certainly true of President Moon. But I think what we may see with the new left-wing president, who he will be much worse than Moon, and we may see offers to North Korea that may give away so much freedom and security that South Korea may never get it back.
Thank you. And I have a question for Ambassador Ryu. Thank you. Could you comment on what are North Korea's objectives towards South Korea? Does it really think it can take over South Korea?
제가 보기에는 북한이 한국을 공산화하기 위한 것이 가장 본질적인 문제라고 생각을 합니다. 그러니까 남과 북은 태어날 때부터 체제 경쟁 속에 뛰어들었습니다. 그래서 이제 북한인 경우에는 김일성이 1950년 6월 25일에 한국 전쟁을 일으키기도 했습니다. 이게 다 체제 경쟁의 일환이거든요. 한마디로 말해서 북한 체제의 한 통일을 지금 바라고 있습니다. 그래서 북한이 주장하고 있는 것도 주한미군 철수거든요. 그런데 지금 현저하게 차이나는 것은 1980년대에 들어서면서부터 남과 북의 체제 경쟁은 완전히 끝났습니다. 그 말은 무슨 말인가 하니 한국이 경제, 정치, 경제, 문화, 군사를 비롯한 모든 영역에서 북한을 완전히 압도했습니다. 지금 현재 한국의 경제 순위가 세계 13위거든요. 그리고 또 GDP가 북한에 비해서 40배 이상 넘습니다. 이렇게 이제 체제 경쟁을 할 수 없는 단계에 이르렀기 때문에 북한이 지금 선택과 집중을 해서 핵에 올인하고 있는 것이라고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 북한은 1980년대부터 시작해서 근 40년 동안 자기 체제를 수호하기 위해서 핵을 계속 질 양쪽으로 강화해 왔다고 생각합니다.
Here, thank you very much. Stephen Yates, I got something for you. Could you comment, you're Mr. China, could you comment on how China views South Korea, views the peninsula, views the US, South Korea, and Japan alliances?
Well, thank you very much. Basically, I would echo a lot of what Gordon gave by way of his introduction and description of the historical relationship and sort of the tributary or subordinate role that near abroad neighbors are meant to play. But I just want to flag a couple of anecdotes and maybe give a proposed solution or an example of how to get back. Number one, a lot of what Gordon described of plainclothes or unmarked agitators and police going in to change reality on the ground, we've seen this in Taiwan, we've seen it especially in Hong Kong. And in the erosion of freedom in Hong Kong, the great magic in a dark way of what the CCP was doing is it convinced the Hong Kong people themselves to destroy their own institutions and give up their own freedoms. And if you look, there's a second example of that that's worldwide, but it affected us here. The COVID virus was developed and deployed out of China. They lied and manipulated the World Health Organization, but the greatest damage done to America during the COVID pandemic was Americans destroying our own institutions and our own freedoms. They got us to do it to us. And so what Gordon and others are warning about are Chinese Communist Party influence operations where they are trying to get Koreans to destroy their own institutions, the pillars of that vaunted alliance that has been forged in blood and should be rock solid. And so it is a version of this mind virus that goes out there. But the only way we can get back is if the Korean people get to a point where they've had it the way the American people had, that there's a Make Korea Great Again movement, the way there's a Make America Great Again movement, and we've got to have a new golden age that is not in America but also in Korea. One of the tools to do that is election integrity. And I'll just end with this anecdote. One of the most attacked areas by the Chinese Communist Party is Taiwan. I've been blessed to spend most of my life from martial law to today looking at the electoral process in Taiwan. Somehow, in a single day, 12 to 15 million people are allowed to vote. They show an identification, they fill out a paper ballot that has witnesses, and they are able to go through and have results by 8 or 9 p.m. that end up not really even being contested. But they have a system. It's not America telling the world have to do it. One of the other vulnerable democracies already does this. And we don't need electronic systems to count. It's done by the precinct level up. And human beings have shown that they can do this with integrity in other countries. And so, watch out for the CCP influence operations. Watch out for the mind virus that gets us to attack each other and our own institutions. But do go back to making it easy to vote and hard to cheat with paper ballots and verifiable systems. With that, hopefully, we have a diagnosis and a prescription.
Now, Attorney Park, along these lines, what would you recommend? What would you like to see changed in the South Korean electoral system to make it more honest?
선거 제도에 있어서 이미 모범 사례가 있습니다. 그거는 바로 대만 사례고, 대만은 당일 투표 그리고 투표소 수개표를 합니다. 부재자 투표도 없고 사전 투표도 없습니다. 그리고 그 투표소에서 바로 개표를 합니다. 이런 식으로 바꾸는 것이 제일 중요하다고 생각합니다. 그리고 그 제가 생각하는 아까 프레드 프라이츠가 얘기를 했는데 over 90% of South Koreans dislike China and strongly identify as pro-Korean. In a survey conducted on right-wing YouTube channels with 40,000 participants, every single respondent expressed support for the USA and dislike for China, with 95% stating they strongly dislike China. South Korea is an anti-communist, pro-American, and freedom-loving nation. But pro-China politicians, there are many pro-China politicians, but the Korean, most of Koreans are pro-American.
Yes, that's one of the peculiarities of the current situation, is that despite how well the leftist Democratic Party of Korea has done in these elections, and they are, by their own admission, they're pro-North Korea, pro-China, they see the United States as the problem. In fact, when they impeached President Yoon, one of the charges was that Yoon had been he had been antagonizing North Korea and the Chinese, and he'd been too friendly to the Japanese. And sort of by definition, this is also saying he's too close to the Americans as well. Yet despite these electoral victories, the polls always say that the vast majority of South Koreans support the US-South Korea alliance, to include keeping military forces on the peninsula in the event the war had someday ended. So it's one of these paradoxes that, like any place, you have to dig into it a bit to kind of understand it. And just an interesting anecdote that I've discovered when I did my research is that, and Attorney Park had mentioned it, but I just want to highlight it, is some of the evidence provided was these pristine ballots, just like stacked up and had never been moved at all, and sometimes they were glued together, and this was presented to the courts as evidence. And the excuse given by the National Election Commission was, well, this is special paper. So if you crinkle it, it goes back to like being flat. You know, you should come up with a better story if you're going to sort of try and address evidence in that way. Now, Professor Tan, or Ambassador Tan, excuse me, what do you've worked on these peninsula issues, human rights in particular. What do you think the possibility of future unification is? Could you comment on that?
I actually believe that we will see a united Korea someday. I have hope that that is the case. If you look at the Korean Peninsula at night, you see darkness over the northern part of the peninsula, and you see the southern part of the peninsula lit up like a Christmas tree. And this is a metaphor of the two Koreas as they are currently divided. North Korea is the most unjust, wicked oppressive regime on planet Earth. And I'm saying that as someone whose job it was to deal with unjust regimes all over the world. It is number one along those lines, bar none. A friend of mine once described it, if you know the Lord of the Rings series, as Mordor. This is the heart of darkness in there. And a wicked regime as evil as North Korea will not be able to stand for a long time by historical standards. It will fall. Exactly how? Exactly when? God knows. But will it be sustainable over a long time by historical standards? I would say no way, and history teaches us that. There is no sane reason why South Korea should want to become more like North Korea. There is no sane reason why South Korea should want to be overrun by communism. Because every time communism has been tried, it has led to the seizure of property of the people and the crushing of the people themselves. No exception, worldwide, every single time it has been tried. So then, those proponents of moving more in a North Korean direction, of falling more into the Chinese Communist Party's orbit, are advocating insanity. Moving into the current crisis in South Korea. Think about this. In these districts in South Korea, voting districts in South Korea, there were more votes than there were registered voters. How in the world could that not be cheating? When you have a situation where the National Election Commission is saying, nothing to see here, move on folks, when you have the Constitutional Court rejecting an inspection of the voter rolls and saying that inspection into the electronic voting system is irrelevant and immaterial to the impeachment case of President Yoon, this is legal nonsense. And I say this as a legal scholar. President Yoon, under Article 77 of the South Korean Constitution, had the constitutional authority as president, as duly elected president of South Korea, to declare martial law in a time of crisis for his country. He did this at great risk to himself as president, and he has been paying the price heroically for his country. For daring to do that, he is being treated as if he is some kind of criminal. You had thousands of police seizing him and throwing him into solitary confinement after the impeachment occurred. This is outrageous. He is the duly elected president of South Korea. And this is no way to treat the president of any country, much less your own president in your own country. The Constitutional Court of South Korea should know that they are being watched. They have a scant amount of time as they are rushing this process forward. And more, the world is watching. More and more South Korean society is waking up to what is going on. There is a youth movement that is sweeping across the country along these lines, and President Yoon has a majority of the population in South Korea supporting him as they recognize his heroic bravery in trying to expose and call for the investigation of the serious election integrity issues that are facing this country. If the National Election Commission is confident in what it has done, why does it not divulge and expose what should be, in their claim, legitimate procedures. If they have something to hide, maybe that explains their behavior and their unwillingness to turn over the basic information that should be transparent and available in a democracy. And if a democracy loses its election integrity, then the fundamental right of the people to govern themselves and to choose those who represent them is lost.
Okay, thanks, Morse. We appreciate that. Now, we've got time for 2 or 3 questions. We are out of time, but I'll just close it out that what you get a sense of all of this, and I think everyone here knows it, is the centrality, the importance of free, honest elections to everything that we've got. And where I was really reminded of it is when I got involved in this question in South Korea, because this was entirely done by citizens who were distressed at what had happened. They're the ones who produced this overwhelming evidence in the face of opposition. So I think everyone here recognizes the importance of honest elections, and it is something that both the United States and this administration and South Korea have in common and have an interest in looking into it. And I would comment that I wish we had more time. You can apply for college credit afterwards if you would like, but I apologize for not giving people more time to talk, but I appreciate you coming, and thank you as well for the audience as well. And if you want to talk to somebody afterwards, please come up. Thank you.